Continuing my series on cases that just don't sit right with me. It was July 11th, 2011 when 6-year-old Max Shacknai fell from a second-floor banister, face first, causing multiple injuries to his head and spine, specifically. There were apparently a few people watching him at the time, one of them being Rebecca Sahau, who was the girlfriend of Max's dad, Jonah Shacknai. This guy is huge in the medicinal world and pharmaceutical world. Jonah Shacknai is a pharmaceutical executive. He's a founder and CEO of major pharmaceutical corporations. He even served as chief aide to the U.S. House of Representatives, specifically on their health policy. Rebecca at the time was allegedly in the bathroom, and her teenage sister was also in the house, but eyes were not on Max at the time of his fall. They suspected that maybe he was playing with something such as a scooter and it was on the carpet. Maybe it got caught on something, which caused him to go over the banister. They were at Jonah Shacknai's summer estate over near San Diego, California. They rushed into the hospital as soon as they can, and they were doing their best to revive him, but things were not looking good for Max. The next day, Rebecca dropped off her sister Zena to the airport so she could go back to their family in Missouri, but while there, picked up Jonah's brother Adam. Rebecca, Jonah, and Adam had dinner that night. Things were going fine. And then the next morning at around 6:45 a.m., Adam found Rebecca hanging from the second-story balcony. She was nude and bound at her wrists, her ankles, and her hands were tied behind her back. There was a blue t-shirt that was actually around her neck and her head, suffocating her as well. Shortly after, he called 911 but told the police that he had already cut her down, possibly trying to revive her, which puts his DNA on Rebecca. When police arrived and EMS, they also tried to revive her, but she was pronounced dead on the scene. And then a couple days later in the hospital, Max unfortunately succumbed to his injuries and passed away as well. The San Diego Sheriff's Department announced this as suicide almost immediately, and there was no other DNA found at the scene. So Rebecca's autopsy showed some interesting things, one of them being head trauma. San Diego medical examiner Jonathan Lucas said that this was possibly because she went head first and maybe hit her head on the ground. However, Werner Spitz chimed in. You might recognize this name from a lot of different trials, specifically the murder of Kaylee Anthony and the trial against Casey Anthony, or you might recognize him from the JFK assassination or the Martin Luther King assassination. He thought, in fact, if this was a suicide situation, then she might have hit her head against the side of the building, but not necessarily on the ground beneath her. But he did clarify that he really needed to have been at the scene to try and get a better idea of what everything looked like. Again, because Adam cut her down, it really tampered maybe with some of the binding and the evidence, especially because the blunt force trauma on her head was noted at 4 different places. So this was very hard to accomplish, again, if she had went head first or anything of the like. At the family's request, they had a second autopsy conducted where they brought in pathologist Dr. Cyril Weck. He discovered that the injuries to Rebecca's throat were actually by manual strangulation and not by hanging. He discovered evidence that Rebecca was potentially sexually assaulted before her death, which the sheriff's department did not initially find. Something also to make note of, which is actually shown kind of a weird way in court that was very uncomfortable. He pretty much had somebody tie themselves up in the same fashion that Rebecca was in, because they wanted to see if it was even possible for her to have gotten that bound and tied. However, the woman that did do it was able to kind of mimic what Rebecca was in. And then one of the more alarming details about the scene of the crime was there was a message written near the room. Painted on the door leading to the room where the balcony was, where she was found, was an odd message that her ex-husband actually clarified for us because officials weren't making an official report on what it said. And according to her ex-husband, it said, "She saved him, can he save her?" They weren't calling this a suicide note, but they were definitely calling it strange. And Rebecca's siblings said that this did not match her handwriting at all. However, Rebecca did like to paint, so people immediately assumed that it was her. One of the biggest question marks to this case is, why was there no other DNA found at the scene? I personally believe that this was murder, this was homicide. How were they able to wipe it completely clean? And according to Rebecca's family, she was a Christian, so suicide really wasn't something that she would have ever thought about. Oddly enough, September 20th, 2011, Jonah Shacknai actually wrote a letter to the California Attorney General, Kamala Harris, now our Vice President, requesting a statewide review of the investigation. Now, Jonah said he did not deny any of the initial investigation findings, but wanted to bring more closure to the family and to himself. Unfortunately, Chief Assistant Attorney General Dane Gillette responded the next day saying that they declined to help any further. Again, this is a very odd case. I do not believe it was suicide. This was definitely homicide. Tell me what you think.
Hotel was built in 1924 and opened its doors in 1927. And it's been a vortex for all things weird and dark and strange ever since. So right on the heels of the Great Depression, there were many suicides at the Cecil Hotel. There were at least 6 reported. So just right out of the gate, there's at least 6. Poison, people slitting their own throats, or just making a grand exit and jumping out one of the windows. Like in 1937, the body of Grace E. Magro was found covered in telephone wire as she jumped out of a 9th-story window. In 1938, Marine Roy Thompson jumped off the roof of the Cecil and was found on a skylight in one of the neighboring buildings. In 1944, 19-year-old Dorothy Jean Purcell woke in the middle of the night with stomach pains, and she gave birth in the bathroom, and she had no idea she was pregnant. And in her shock and disbelief and lack of understanding, she thought her baby was dead and threw it out the window, and was found on the roof of another neighboring building. In 1962, George Giannini, 65, was just strolling by the hotel, hands in his pocket, minding his own business, and he was struck to death by Pauline Otten, 27, who jumped out of the 9th-story window. The Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, well, he stayed at the hotel in the 1980s pretty famously, and it was during his prolific serial killing career, and supposedly he threw his bloody clothes in the Cecil's dumpster, and then I think would show up in the lobby just wearing his underwear, and everyone was like, it's the 80s, I don't know. 2013, 21-year-old college student Elisa Lam from Vancouver was found dead in a water tank on the rooftop of the Cecil Hotel. Her clothes were found nearby, but what's perhaps the most strange and the most noteworthy visually are these videos of Elisa Lam in the elevators of the hotel. No one's quite sure what's happening. There's a lot of speculation. I'm sure somebody is right. It's very eerie and it's very strange to watch because you know those videos were captured very soon before her untimely death.
This girl went missing on a cruise ship. 24-year-old Rebecca Curiam disappeared in March 2011. The Disney Wonder cruise ship she was working on was sailing off the coast of New Mexico when Rebecca disappeared. She was last seen in the crew lounge by her colleagues, having what was described as an emotional phone call. That was the last time anybody saw her. The main theory is that Rebecca fell overboard, either by accidentally tripping or being swept out by a rogue wave. Some have suggested suicide, but the family doesn't really support this, and others have even suggested a cover-up by Disney. What do you think happened?